When my son tied the knot, I held on to the $95 million secret. Part 2. For a brief instant, I felt a spark of optimism that perhaps, just perhaps, this revelation would be sufficient to restore my son's perspective. I was mistaken. What transpired afterward, I discovered from my longtime friend Jerome Williams, who had been working the occasion as part of the catering crew. Jerome and I had been acquainted for 25 years. He'd been present at the medical center when his youngest child was delivered, and I'd been the one to repair the malfunctioning air conditioning in the maternity ward on that sweltering July evening. Genuine friendship, the type forged on mutual regard and common hardships, not private club memberships and investment accounts. Jerome telephoned me the following morning, his tone weighed down with disappointment. "Sam, I must share with you what occurred after your departure. You won't appreciate it, but you must be informed. And if you're still listening to this, I appreciate it. Before I continue, I'd like you to do me a small favor. Press that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and mention your country in the comments. I want to discover where you're viewing from, and believe me, you'll want to learn how this all concluded. I served myself a mug of coffee, Lorraine's signature blend that I still purchase from the little shop downtown, and settled into my kitchen seat, the identical chair where I'd assisted Marcus with algebra assignments and listened to him rehearse his medical school interview responses. Share with me, Jerome, your son returned inside all right, marched directly up to that main table where the Ashworth family was seated, appearing as though they'd encountered a spirit. The entire room was buzzing, people murmuring, attempting to determine what had just occurred. Jerome hesitated, and I could hear him drawing a deep breath on the other side of the line. Your son stood right there before all those refined people and declared, "I hope you all can now see that I am as impoverished as you believed." But Sam, the manner in which he expressed it wasn't like he was defending himself or you. It was as though he was attempting to demonstrate he deserved a place at their table. My spirits dropped. Even with everything that had transpired, Marcus was still pursuing their validation. What was their response? That's the portion that's going to wound Sam. That spouse of his, Victoria. She didn't even flinch. Calm as ice. She gazed at him and stated, "Well, we're legally wed now, so what precisely do you intend to do about it? I wed you without even realizing you were wealthy, so you should actually be grateful to me. It demonstrates I did it for affection, not money. That makes my family and me the ideal choice. We're clearly the appropriate sort of people." I felt as though someone had struck me in the abdomen. The manipulation was so seamless, so rehearsed that I nearly admired the craft of it. And Marcus, he accepted it, Sam, completely. You could observe it on his face. She reversed it, so that somehow their fortune-hunting conduct was evidence of their moral character, as if they merited recognition for being willing to marry below their social standing. I closed my eyes and thought about Lorraine. She would have recognized Victoria's manipulation instantly. She would have known precisely what to say to help Marcus see clearly. But Lorraine wasn't present, and I'd already revealed my cards. Her father, Charles, he immediately joined in, began discussing how this was marvelous news, how they'd obviously misjudged the family's financial circumstances, and how they anticipated getting to know the genuine Samuel Washington. The man's demeanor completely shifted, Sam, as if he was addressing an entirely different person. Naturally it had. Money was the only dialect the Ashworths spoke fluently. Patricia was more subtle about it, Jerome mentioned. Started elaborating about how this explained Marcus's refined sensibilities, and how she'd always recognized there was something exceptional about him. Made it sound as though she'd been supporting him all along. The hypocrisy was astounding, but not surprising. People like the Ashworths had perfected the art of rewriting history to serve their purposes. What did Marcus say to all this? That's what shattered my heart, Sam. The boy was absorbing it all, grinning and agreeing as though they just genuinely welcomed him into the family, as if the past 6 months of disrespect had never occurred. I sat in my kitchen, gazing out at the small garden Lorraine had cultivated, watching the morning sunlight illuminate the roses she'd selected because they reminded her of her mother's yard in Alabama. Everything in this home was authentic, genuine, chosen with love rather than to impress. How had I failed to transmit that wisdom to my son? Over the following weeks, the Ashworth family's transformation was extraordinary to observe. It was like watching performers change their costumes and assume completely different characters. Charles contacted me personally to apologize for any misunderstandings and to invite me to dinner at their residence. Patricia sent flowers, costly arrangements that probably cost more than most people spend on food, accompanied by handwritten notes about how much she anticipated getting to know the real Samuel Washington. It was as if my financial status was a medical condition that required delicate management. "No need to apologize, Victoria," I said, stepping aside to allow her entry. "I understand completely." She positioned herself on my couch, the same couch she barely acknowledged during her first visit, and examined the room with fresh eyes. The family photographs that had seemed quaint before were now charming. The modest furniture that had been embarrassing was now authentic and down to earth. "This home has such character," she said, reaching for a framed photo of Marcus's medical school graduation. "You can truly feel the love here. It's so refreshing after all the pretentious homes in Potomac." I nearly laughed. The same house she'd silently criticized 6 months ago was now refreshingly unpretentious. "Marcus tells me you're planning to establish a foundation," she continued, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. "That's so admirable. We'd love to assist however we can. Daddy knows so many people in the philanthropic world." Of course Charles wanted to help, opening doors in Washington society, like association with a $95 million foundation. "That's generous of you to offer," I said cautiously. "I'm still in the early planning phases." Victoria leaned forward, her expression sincere. "You know, Dad Washington, I feel like we started off poorly. I'd love for us to spend more time together. Maybe you could join us for dinner this Sunday. We could make a regular thing. Family dinner every week. I know how important family is to Marcus. Family dinners every week with the same people who attempted to seat me at table 12 just a month ago." "That sounds pleasant, Victoria. Wonderful. And please bring your appetite. I'm going to prepare all of Marcus's favorite dishes. I want to learn all the recipes that remind him of home." She was skilled, I'll admit. The perfect daughter-in-law performance was flawlessly executed. If I hadn't witnessed her true nature firsthand, I might have been deceived myself. The Sunday dinners became a weekly performance worthy of Broadway. Every week Victoria would prepare elaborate meals, always including at least one dish she claimed was Marcus's childhood favorite, though I noticed she had to ask him about ingredients and preparation methods each time. Charles would preside at the head of the table, entertaining us with stories about his important clients and seeking my opinions on investment strategies. The same man who barely acknowledged my presence now pursued my financial wisdom with the enthusiasm of a new convert. Patricia played the role of devoted grandmother-in-waiting, constantly dropping hints about how much she anticipated grandchildren and how wonderful it would be to have little ones running around their large house. "Of course, we're not in any hurry," Victoria would say, glancing meaningfully at Marcus. "We want to wait until we're really established, maybe in a few years." For years, she'd told Marcus before the wedding. They'd wait 4 years to start a family, focus on their careers, travel the world. It was a sensible plan that had made Marcus feel mature and responsible. But I noticed how Victoria's timeline seemed to be shifting, how she'd linger in front of the baby clothes section when we encountered each other at the department store, and how she'd get a distant look in her eyes whenever Patricia mentioned grandchildren. Marcus seemed oblivious to the change, caught up in his new life as a surgeon with important in-laws and a beautiful wife who was finally being accepted by Washington society. He'd call me every few days, his voice bright with excitement about dinner parties and charity galas and golf games with Charles's business associates. "Dad, you should see the crowd Victoria associates with senators' wives, federal judges, CEOs of major corporations. I never imagined I'd be part of something like this." What broke my heart wasn't that he was enjoying the lifestyle. It was that he seemed to have forgotten there was anything else worth valuing. 3 months after the wedding, Jerome called with an update that didn't surprise me, but still managed to disappoint. They're putting on quite the show for you, Sam, but I've been talking to some of the other folks who work those Potomac parties, and the word is your daughter-in-law and her family have been doing a lot of talking about your money. I wasn't shocked, but I was curious about the details. What kind of talking? The kind where they're already spending it in their minds. Patricia's been telling her bridge club about the foundation you're starting, but she's making it sound like it's already a certainty and Charles is going to be involved in managing it. Victoria's been shopping for a bigger house, telling people Marcus is about to come into a significant inheritance. Of course they were. In their minds, marriage to Marcus meant access to the Washington fortune, such as it was. There's something else. Sam, something that might interest you. What's that? Victoria's been asking questions about when you might be ready to share the financial responsibilities with Marcus. She's been talking to Charles about how unusual it is for someone your age to be managing such a large estate without involving the next generation. I almost smiled at the transparency of it. They were growing impatient. The weekly dinners and flower deliveries were investments, and they wanted to see returns. How long do you think they'll keep this up? As long as it takes, I imagine. But Sam, there's something else. Something you need to know about Victoria. The seriousness in Jerome's voice made me pay closer attention. What is it? I've been hearing things from the medical community. You know how doctors talk to each other. Victoria's been seeing specialists, fertility doctors, specifically. They're trying to have children. That's just it. I don't think they are. Not yet anyway. But she's been having tests done, getting evaluated, like she's planning ahead for something. 4 months after the wedding, Victoria announced she was ready to start a family. Marcus called me that evening, his voice bubbling with excitement. Dad, Victoria and I have been talking, and we've decided we don't want to wait to have kids after all. We're going to start trying right away. That's quite a change from your original plan, I said carefully. I know, but Victoria made such a good point. She said life is short, and we shouldn't postpone happiness just because of some arbitrary timeline. She said seeing how much family means to you made her realize how important it is to start building our own. Of course she'd framed it that way. Victoria had a gift for making her desires sound like moral imperatives. She also pointed out that my career is stable now, and with your resources, we don't need to worry about the financial aspects of raising children the way most couples do. There it was, the real reason for the sudden change of heart. Victoria had realized that Washington family money meant Washington family security, and she wanted to cement her position as quickly as possible. Are you happy about this, son? Are you kidding? I'm thrilled. I've always wanted kids, and Victoria's going to be an amazing mother. She's already talking about converting one of the rooms in our house into a nursery. Their house. The 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale neighborhood that Marcus had stretched his surgeon's salary to afford, trying to keep up with Victoria's lifestyle expectations. That's wonderful, Marcus. I'm happy for you both. And I was, in a way, despite everything. The thought of grandchildren, Lorraine's grandchildren, filled me with a joy I hadn't expected. Over the next few weeks, Victoria threw herself into pregnancy preparation with the same intensity she'd applied to wedding planning. She dragged Marcus to prenatal vitamin consultations, painted potential nursery rooms, and began dropping hints about needing a larger house to accommodate their future family. We're going to need more space, she'd say during our Sunday dinners, her hand resting meaningfully on her still flat stomach. Children need room to grow, and our current house is really more suited for a young couple than a family. Charles would nod sagely. Real estate is always a good investment, especially in the right neighborhoods. We'd be happy to help you look at some properties. Marcus, I know all the best areas. Patricia would chime in with thoughts about private schools and the importance of choosing the right neighborhood for raising children. Education is so important, she'd say, glancing at me as though she was generously including me in the conversation. We want to make sure these grandchildren have every advantage. Marcus would smile and nod, clearly enjoying the feeling of being included in their long-term planning. He didn't seem to notice that all their suggestions involved spending money, my money, ultimately, that he didn't yet have access to. 6 weeks later, Victoria announced she was pregnant. The news was delivered during one of our Sunday dinners with all the ceremony of a state announcement. Victoria stood up at the end of the meal, her hand on Marcus's shoulder, and smiled at the assembled family. "We have wonderful news to share," she said, her voice bright with happiness. "Marcus and I are expecting our first child." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Patricia burst into tears of joy. Charles immediately started talking about trust funds and college savings plans, and Marcus looked like he might float right out of his chair. I felt a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of a grandchild, concern about Victoria's motivations, and sadness that Lorraine wasn't here to share this moment. "Congratulations," I said, standing to hug them both. Lorraine would have been so happy. Victoria's embrace felt genuine for perhaps the first time since I'd known her. "Thank you, Dad Washington. We're so excited, and we're hoping you'll be very involved in this baby's life." Of course they were. Grandparents with $95 million were the kind of family members you want to stay close to. Over the following weeks, the pregnancy became the center of everyone's attention. Victoria embraced the role of expectant mother with theatrical enthusiasm, documenting every milestone, every doctor's appointment, every pregnancy symptom. She also began making increasingly expensive preparations. The nursery required complete renovation. She needed a new wardrobe for her changing body. The house definitely needed upgrades to be suitable for a child. "We really should think about moving," she'd say, rubbing her barely visible bump. "This neighborhood is nice, but the schools aren't the best, and we want what's best for our children." Children, plural. Always plural. As if this pregnancy was just a first step in a larger plan. Marcus was completely enchanted by all of it. He called me multiple times a week with updates about ultrasounds and baby names and nursery themes. For the first time since the wedding, he sounded genuinely happy, rather than just impressed with his circumstances. "Dad, you should see the ultrasound pictures. The baby's perfectly healthy, growing right on schedule. Victoria is taking such good care of herself." She was indeed taking excellent care of herself. Private doctors, expensive prenatal vitamins, weekly massages for pregnancy stress relief, all paid for by Marcus's steadily increasing credit card debt, though he didn't seem concerned about the mounting bills. "Victoria says we shouldn't worry about money right now," he told me when I gently raised the subject. "She says this is an investment in our family's future, and we'll figure out the finances later." Later, when the foundation money became available, when I decided to share the wealth with the next generation, Victoria's timeline was becoming clearer. Victoria's pregnancy progressed smoothly, almost suspiciously so. She never experienced morning sickness, never had any complications, never seemed to struggle with any of the physical challenges that most expectant mothers face. "She's just naturally suited for pregnancy," Marcus would say proudly. "The doctor says she's textbook perfect." When Victoria went into labor, it was with the same efficiency that characterized everything else about her. She was in a hospital for exactly the standard amount of time, delivered healthy twin girls with minimal drama, and recovered faster than anyone expected. Maya and Sophie Washington Ashworth were beautiful babies, with Marcus's dark eyes and features that could have come from either side of the family. Holding them for the first time, I felt a love so overwhelming it took my breath away. These were Lorraine's granddaughters. These little girls carried our family forward into the future. But even in that moment of pure joy, I noticed something odd. Victoria's reaction to the babies seemed almost attached. She held them when she needed to, fed them when required, smiled for all the photos. But there was something missing, some natural maternal connection that I had expected to see. Marcus, on the other hand, was completely besotted with those babies. He held them every chance he got, took hundreds of photos, called me at all hours to share every milestone. "Dad," Maya smiled today. I swear she recognized my voice. And Sophie, she's already trying to hold her head up. They're going to be so smart. The babies became the center of Marcus's world in a way that seemed to surprise Victoria. She'd expected motherhood to be another role she could perform, but Marcus's genuine devotion to his daughters was something she hadn't anticipated. He spends every free moment with them. She complained during our Sunday dinners. I barely see him anymore. He comes home from the hospital and goes straight to the nursery. Patricia would nod sympathetically. New fathers can be overwhelming. Charles was the same way with Victoria. But don't worry, dear, the novelty will wear off. But it didn't wear off. If anything, Marcus became more devoted to his daughters as they grew. He'd bring them to visit me every weekend, carrying them around my house and pointing out all the same things I'd shown him when he was small. This is where Grandpa Sam lives. Girls, this is where your daddy grew up. Someday I'll tell you all about your grandmother Lorraine. Those weekends became the highlight of my life. Maya and Sophie were bright, curious babies who seemed to recognize me from birth. They'd reach for me with tiny hands, babble in my direction, fall asleep in my arms while I sat in the same recliner where I'd once held their father. But I noticed that Victoria rarely came along for these visits. She always had something else to do. Shopping, spa appointments, lunch with friends. The grandmother-to-be enthusiasm she'd shown during pregnancy had evaporated once the actual babies arrived. The twins were barely a year old when Victoria started talking about having more children. Maya and Sophie need siblings, she'd say during our Sunday dinners. Children shouldn't grow up alone. I was an only child, and I always felt like something was missing. Marcus would smile and nod, clearly charmed by his wife's supposed maternal instincts. Victoria's right. I love being an only child, but I think it would be nice for the girls to have brothers or sisters to grow up with. Patricia would beam with approval. Large families are such a blessing, and you're both young. There's no reason to wait. Charles would add his perspective about the financial advantages of having multiple children close in age. Same schools, same activities, same social circles, much more efficient. With the Ashworths, everything came down to efficiency and strategy, even family planning. Within 6 months, Victoria was pregnant again, this time with triplets. The news was delivered with the same theatrical fanfare as the first pregnancy, but I noticed Marcus looked a bit overwhelmed by the prospect of 5 children under the age of 2. Triplets, he said, shaking his head in amazement. Can you believe it, Dad? 5 kids total. Victoria says we're going to need a much bigger house. Of course they were. 5 children required more space, more bedrooms, more bathrooms, more everything. And more everything required more money. We're looking at houses in McLean, Victoria announced during dinner, her hand resting on her growing belly. There's a lovely 6-bedroom colonial with a 3-car garage and a pool, perfect for a large family. McLean, one of the wealthiest suburbs in the D.C. area, where houses started at well over $1 million and neighbors included senators, Supreme Court justices, and Fortune 500 CEOs. That sounds expensive, I said mildly. It's an investment, Charles jumped in smoothly. Property values in McLean never depreciate, and the schools are among the best in the country. We want what's best for the grandchildren. Marcus looked uncertain for the first time in months. I don't know if we can afford McLean on my salary, even with the bonuses. Victoria reached over and took his hand. Sweetheart, we don't have to worry about that right now. Daddy says there are creative financing options for people in our situation, and once the foundation gets established and you become more involved in managing the family assets. There was again the assumption that Marcus's inheritance was just a matter of time and paperwork. Besides, Patricia added, Samuel certainly wants his grandchildren to have the best possible start in life. I'm sure he understands the importance of the right neighborhood, the right schools, the right social connections. They were all looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to confirm that yes, of course I'd help finance their upgrade to McLean society. We'll see, I said non-committally. Let's focus on the pregnancy first. Victoria's second pregnancy was as smooth as her first, which struck me as statistically improbable. Twin pregnancies were often complicated. Triplet pregnancies were almost always high risk. But Victoria sailed through 9 months without a single problem. When the triplets were born, 3 healthy boys, they named Charles, Samuel, and Marcus Jr., I felt that same overwhelming love I'd experienced with the twins. But I also felt something else. Suspicion. 5 perfectly healthy children in less than 2 years? No complications, no difficulties, no problems of any kind? Either Victoria was the most naturally gifted mother in medical history, or something else was going on. I started paying closer attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Victoria's prenatal appointments were always at private clinics rather than Marcus's hospital. She was unusually secretive about her medical care, claiming she wanted privacy from Marcus's colleagues. The baby's birth certificates listed different attending physicians for each pregnancy. Most telling of all, Victoria showed no signs of the physical toll that 5 pregnancies should have taken. She looked exactly the same as she had on her wedding day. Not like a woman who had carried and delivered 5 children in rapid succession. I didn't say anything to Marcus. He was overwhelmed with work and 5 young children, barely keeping his head above water. But I started asking careful questions and paying attention to inconsistencies in Victoria's stories. The pieces began to fall into place when I hired Maria Santos to help with household cleaning. Maria was a quiet, hard-working woman who needed extra income to support her daughter's college education. She was also the kind of person who noticed everything and said very little. One afternoon, while she was cleaning my kitchen, Maria mentioned that her daughter was attending nursing school thanks to a scholarship from a new foundation, the Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation. She said proudly, they gave my Rosa a full scholarship. She's going to be a nurse, help people like her grandmother did before she passed. I nearly dropped the cup I was holding. Your daughter received a scholarship from my foundation? Yes, Mr. Washington. She applied, and they called her for an interview. Such nice people. They said the foundation wanted to help children from working families become doctors and nurses and teachers. I'd been so focused on the Ashworth family drama that I'd let my lawyers move forward with establishing the foundation without my direct involvement. Apparently, it was already operational and awarding scholarships. Rosa, she works part-time for a family in McLean to help pay for her other expenses. Maria continued. The Washington Ashworth family. Such a coincidence, no? The same last name as you. My blood ran cold. The Washington Ashworth family? Yes, very nice people. 5 beautiful children. Rosa, she helps with the babies sometimes when the parents go out. The Senora, she is very particular about who watches the children. I try to keep my voice casual. Rosa must learn a lot working for a family with so many young children. Maria's expression grew thoughtful. She says something strange, though. The Senora, she knows nothing about babies. Rosa has to teach her how to hold them, how to feed them, like she never spent time with them as babies. The final piece clicked into place. Victoria hadn't carried those children. She'd found a way to obtain them through some kind of surrogacy arrangement, then presented them to Marcus as his biological offspring. But why? And how? The answer came 6 months later, in the most terrifying way possible. Victoria had been increasingly impatient about my plans for distributing the foundation money. During our weekly Sunday dinners, she'd grown bolder about asking when Marcus might take on a more active role in managing the family's financial interests. Daddy says it's unusual for someone your age to maintain complete control over such substantial assets. She'd say, her tone light, but her meaning clear. Most families involve the next generation much earlier in the process. I'm still figuring things out. I'd reply, these decisions shouldn't be rushed. But Victoria was tired of waiting. She had calculated that Marcus was entitled to half the money as Lorraine's heir, and she wanted access to that inheritance immediately. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Invite me for a special family dinner. Cook my favorite meal, and add a little something extra to ensure I wouldn't be around much longer to complicate their financial planning. It was Maria who saved my life. She'd started working for the Washington Ashworth family 3 days a week, helping with cleaning and childcare. She was there that Sunday when Victoria was preparing the special dinner she'd planned for me. Mr. Washington. Maria called me that afternoon, her voice urgent but carefully controlled. I think you should not eat the food tonight. I saw things in the kitchen that worry me. What kind of things, Maria? The Sonora. She put something in your plate. Something from a little bottle she hid in her purse. When she asked me to serve you, I was scared. What did you do? I switched the plates, Mr. Washington. I gave you mine instead. But you should not go there. Something is very wrong. I called Marcus immediately and told him I was coming down with something, probably the flu, and wouldn't be able to make dinner. He was disappointed, but understanding. Victoria made your favorite pot roast, he said. She was so looking forward to seeing you. I'm sure she was. That night, I sat in my house, thinking about what Maria had told me. Victoria had tried to poison me. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, had decided that killing me was easier than waiting for me to die naturally. The realization was devastating, but it also clarified everything. This wasn't about impatience or greed. This was about desperation. Victoria and her family had made financial commitments based on money they didn't yet have access to. The McLean house, the private schools, the lifestyle they were projecting, all required cash flow that depended on my death or my cooperation. Since I wasn't cooperating, they decided to expedite the first option. I knew they wouldn't give up after one failed attempt. Victoria was too determined, and the Ashworth family had too much invested in the outcome to accept defeat. I called Jerome the next morning and asked if he knew anyone in private security. Within 2 days, I had a consultation with David Chun, a former FBI agent who specialized in personal protection and surveillance. Mr. Washington, David said after I'd explained the situation, "You're in immediate danger. If they tried once and failed, they'll try again, and next time they'll be more careful." I knew he was right, but I also knew I needed evidence. If I went to police with accusations of attempted murder, it would be my word against Victoria's, a grandfather's suspicions against a young mother with 5 small children. What do you recommend? We need to document everything, install security cameras, record conversations, gather evidence of their intentions. But we also need to protect you in the meantime. David's team installed hidden cameras throughout my house and provided me with recording devices that looked like ordinary, everyday items. They also began discreet surveillance of the Ashworth family, monitoring their communications and activities. Meanwhile, I started carrying a small recording device whenever I visited their house. If Victoria or her family revealed their plans in conversation, I wanted to capture every word. The evidence began accumulating quickly. Charles was recorded talking to Patricia about the old man's stubbornness and how they needed to find a way to accelerate the inheritance timeline. Victoria was caught on camera, making phone calls about alternative solutions to their cash flow problem. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Rosa Santos, Maria's daughter. Rosa had been working for the Washington Ashworth family for months, helping with childcare and household tasks. As a nursing student, she had naturally gravitated toward caring for the children, and she'd noticed things that troubled her. The children don't look like Mr. Marcus, she told her mother during one of their weekly phone calls. And Mrs. Victoria, she doesn't know basic things about them, like she never spent time with them as babies. Rosa had also overheard conversations between Victoria and her mother about fertility treatments and specialist doctors. But the conversations didn't make sense in the context of someone who'd successfully carried 5 children to term. She was talking about egg donors and gestational carriers. Rosa reported to David's team, like she was explaining how the process worked, not like someone who'd been through it herself. The picture was becoming clearer. Victoria had used donor eggs and surrogate mothers to create 5 children who appear to be hers and Marcus's biological offspring. The children were legally theirs through surrogacy arrangements, but Marcus had no idea that Victoria hadn't actually carried his children. But why go to such elaborate lengths? Why not simply have children naturally? The answer came from Victoria's medical records, which David's team obtained through careful investigation. Victoria was infertile due to a congenital condition that made pregnancy impossible. She'd known this since college, but she'd never told Marcus. Instead, she'd created an elaborate deception using modern reproductive technology to give Marcus the large family he'd always wanted, while positioning herself as the devoted mother of his children. 3 weeks after the poisoning attempt, Victoria and her family decided to try a more direct approach. David's surveillance team intercepted a phone call between Charles and a man named Roberto Mendez, who specialized in what Charles euphemistically called problem-solving for high-net-worth families. "The old man is becoming a liability," Charles said. "He's not cooperated with the family's financial planning, and we need a permanent solution." Roberto's response was chilling in its casualness. "These things happen to elderly people all the time. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents in the home. Very sad, but very natural." They arranged to meet at the Ashworth house the following Sunday to finalize the details. The plan was simple. Roberto and his associate would break into my house during the weekly family dinner. It would look like a burglary gone wrong and ensure that I wouldn't survive the encounter. But Rosa Santos was working that Sunday, helping Victoria prepare for the family dinner, and Rosa heard everything. The moment the Ashworth family left for their meeting with Roberto, Rosa called her mother. Maria immediately called me, and I alerted David's team. Within hours, we had a complete recording of the meeting, courtesy of the surveillance equipment David had placed in Rosa's cleaning supplies. Victoria, Charles, Patricia, and even Marcus were all present when Roberto outlined his plan for murdering me. Well, almost all present. Marcus had stepped out to check on the children just as Roberto was explaining the details. He'd missed the most incriminating part of the conversation, which meant he still had no idea what his wife and in-laws were planning. But we had everything we needed: video evidence of the conspiracy, audio recordings of the planning sessions, financial records showing the Ashworth family's desperate need for immediate access to my money. The trap was set. That Sunday evening, Roberto Mendez and his associate arrived at my house right on schedule. They'd been given a key by Victoria and specific instructions about how to make my death look like the result of a burglary gone wrong. What they found instead was a house full of FBI agents and D.C. police officers, all waiting with arrest warrants and enough evidence to put the entire conspiracy behind bars. Roberto confessed within hours, providing details about his agreement with the Ashworth family and revealing that this wasn't their first attempt to solve financial problems through violence. Charles had apparently used Roberto's services before, though he'd been more careful about keeping his involvement secret in previous cases. The arrests were swift and thorough. Victoria was taken into custody at her home while she was putting the children to bed. Charles and Patricia were arrested at their Potomac mansion during a dinner party with some of Washington's most prominent families. The scandal will be front-page news in the Washington Post within hours. Marcus called me from the police station, his voice broken and confused. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening. They're saying Victoria tried to have you killed. They're saying she's been lying about the children, that her whole family was involved in some kind of conspiracy." I poured him a cup of coffee, the same kind Lorraine used to make when Marcus had bad dreams as a child, and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. "It's all true, son." I told him everything. The poisoning attempt that Maria had prevented, the recorded conversations about hiring killers, the DNA evidence showing that none of his children were biologically his, and that Victoria had never actually been pregnant with any of them. But she was pregnant, he said when I finished. I was there for the doctor's appointments, the ultrasounds, the deliveries. I held her hand during labor. She was very good at maintaining the illusion, I said gently. Professional actors, medical equipment, fake sonograms. With enough money and planning, it's possible to fake almost anything. Why? Why would she do all this? Because she couldn't have children naturally, but she knew you wanted a large family, and because she and her family saw you as their pathway to my money. Marcus put his head in his hands and sobbed like I hadn't seen him cry since his mother's funeral. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. You tried to warn me, and I wouldn't listen. I let them make me ashamed of you, ashamed of our family, ashamed of everything you and Mom taught me. I reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he was 5 years old and scared of the dark. You don't need to apologize to me, son. You need to figure out how to move forward. Those 5 children upstairs are going to need their father more than ever. But they're not mine, Marcus said, looking up with tear-stained eyes. The DNA tests. Biology doesn't make a family, Marcus. Love makes a family. You've been those children's father since the day they were born. That doesn't change because of what Victoria did. I could see him processing this. Try to reconcile everything he believed about his life with a new reality. What am I going to do, Dad? How do I explain this to them when they're older? How do I raise 5 children by myself? You're not by yourself, I said firmly. You never were. You're my son, they're my grandchildren, and we're going to figure this out together. Victoria, Charles, and Patricia were all convicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and racketeering. Victoria received 25 years in federal prison. Charles got 30 years. Patricia, who had played a supporting role in the conspiracy, received 15 years. The trials were a media sensation. The Washington inheritance plot became a cautionary tale about greed, deception, and the corrupting influence of money. Every detail of the Ashworth family scheme was dissected in newspapers, magazines, and television programs. Marcus testified against his wife and in-laws, providing crucial evidence about their manipulation and lies. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but he knew it was necessary for the children's future. They need to know that their father stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He told me the night before his testimony. The surrogacy arrangements complicated the legal proceedings. Technically, Marcus was the legal father of all 5 children through contract Victoria had signed using forged documents and false representations. But the biological complexities meant that custody arrangements required careful legal maneuvering. In the end, I petitioned the court to become the legal guardian of Charles, Samuel, and Marcus Jr., the 3 children who weren't biologically related to Marcus. This allowed Marcus to maintain full custody of Maya and Sophie, while ensuring that all 5 children could remain together as siblings. It was an unusual arrangement, but it worked for our family. The house in McLean had to be sold to pay off Victoria's debts. The lifestyle she'd been projecting was entirely financed through credit cards, loans, and promises of future inheritance money. When the truth came out, the financial house of cards collapsed completely. Marcus moved back home with me and the children, the same house where he'd grown up, where Lorraine had taught him to read, where I'd help him with homework and listen to his dreams about becoming a doctor. It was chaotic at first. 5 young children in a house that hadn't seen that kind of activity in decades. But it was also joyful in a way I hadn't experienced since Lorraine passed away. Maya and Sophie, now 2 years old, adapted quickly to their new living situation. They were bright, curious toddlers who filled the house with laughter and energy. The triplets, just a year old, were too young to understand the changes but seemed to thrive with the additional attention and stability. Marcus threw himself into being a full-time father with the same dedication he'd once applied to his medical career. He reduced his hospital hours to part-time, using his mornings for patient care and his afternoons for parenting duties. I missed so much of their early development. He told me one evening as we watched the children play in the living room. I was so focused on impressing Victoria's family that I didn't see what was right in front of me. You see it now, I said. That's what matters. We established new routines, new traditions. Sunday dinners became about family time rather than performance. Bedtime stories in the same room, where I'd read to Marcus 30 years earlier. Weekend trips to the same parks and museums, where Lorraine and I had taken him as a child. The children flourished in this environment. Maya began speaking in full sentences. showing an early aptitude for language that reminded me of her grandmother. Sophie demonstrated an analytical mind, always asking why and wanting to understand how things worked. The triplets developed distinct personalities. Charles was the athlete, always in motion, climbing everything in sight. Samuel was a quiet thinker, preferring books and puzzles to physical activities. Marcus Jr. was a social butterfly, charming everyone he met with his infectious smile and outgoing personality. With the legal proceedings concluded and our family situation stabilized, I turned my attention back to the Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation. The organization had been operating successfully for months, awarding scholarships to deserving students from working-class families. Maria's daughter, Rosa, was one of our first scholarship recipients. She graduated from nursing school with honors and immediately found a position at the same hospital where I'd worked for 30 years. Her success story became a model for what we wanted to achieve. Mr. Washington, Rosa said during the foundation's first annual scholarship ceremony, "Your foundation didn't just pay for my education. It showed me that someone believed in my potential even when I didn't believe in myself." That was exactly what Lorraine had envisioned, not just financial assistance, but validation and support for young people who might otherwise never get the chance to pursue their dreams. The foundation quickly expanded beyond education. We established mentorship programs, connecting scholarship recipients with successful professionals in their chosen fields. We created job placement services, helping graduates find positions that utilize their new skills. We even started a small business incubator, providing seed funding for graduates who wanted to become entrepreneurs. Marcus became increasingly involved in the foundation's operations as he recognized the impact on the community. He began volunteering at our mentorship events, sharing his story about the importance of education and perseverance. "I want these kids to know that success isn't about where you come from or how much money your family has," he would say. "It's about working hard, treating people with respect, and never forgetting your values." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Marcus was now teaching the same lessons that Lorraine and I had tried to instill in him, lessons he'd temporarily forgotten in his pursuit of social acceptance. As the children grew older, they began asking questions about their mother and the Ashworth grandparents they barely remembered. Maya, always the most verbal, was the first to ask directly, "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy live with us anymore?" Marcus and I had discussed how to handle these conversations. We decided on honesty appropriate to their age level, focusing on the children's security and well-being rather than the dramatic details of Victoria's crimes. "Mommy made some very bad choices," Marcus explained, sitting on the couch with Maya on his lap. "She hurt people and broke the law, so she has to live in a special place where people go when they do bad things." "Did she hurt us?" Sophie asked, always the analytical one. "She never hurt you physically," Marcus said carefully, "but she lied about some important things, and lying people you love is a kind of hurt too." The children accepted these explanations with the resilience that young children often demonstrate. They were more interested in their current life, their toys, their friends, their daily routines, than dwelling on abstract concepts about their absent mother. As they got older, we would tell them more about the surrogacy arrangements, about their biological heritage, about the complex web of deception that had brought them into the world. The triplets, now toddlers, showed no signs of feeling different from their sisters. To them, Marcus was simply Daddy, and I was simply Grandpa Sam. Blood relations were less important than daily love and care. Grandpa Sam, little Samuel, said one evening as I was reading him a bedtime story, "Will you always live with us?" "As long as you need me, I promise," and I meant it. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, Maria Santos came to me with information that changed everything we thought we knew about the children's origins. "Mr. Washington," she said during one of our regular conversations, "there's something Rosa discovered about the children that I think you should know." We were sitting in my kitchen, the same place where she'd warned me about Victoria's poisoning attempt. But this time her expression was excited rather than concerned. "What is it, Maria?" "Rosa. She has been working part-time at the fertility clinic, where Mrs. Victoria arranged for the children. She was organizing old files when she found something interesting. Maria pulled out a folder of photocopied documents. The donor information for the triplets, she said. Rosa was not supposed to see this, but she recognized the names and thought you should know. I opened the folder and began reading. The documents detailed the genetic material used to create Charles, Samuel, and Marcus Jr. The sperm donor was listed as anonymous donor number 847, but there were additional notes in the margins. Look at this page, Maria said, pointing to a medical history form. The donor information includes family medical background. As I read through the details, my heart began racing. The donor had a family history of hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease, exactly the same conditions that had affected my father and grandfather. The physical description matched Marcus almost perfectly. Height, weight, eye color, even specific details about facial features. Maria, this looks like... Yes, Mr. Washington. Rosa thinks the sperm donor was Mr. Marcus himself. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Victoria had used Marcus's genetic material for all the children, but she'd kept the triplets' parentage secret to maintain leverage over the family finances. If Marcus knew all 5 children were biologically his, he might have been less willing to go along with her increasingly expensive lifestyle demands. Rose is sure about this. She compared the donor records with Mr. Marcus's medical files from when he was working at the hospital. Everything matches perfectly. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by this revelation. All 5 children were Marcus's biological offspring. Victoria's deception had been even more elaborate than we'd realized. She'd hidden the truth not just from Marcus, but from the legal system and even from her own family. Maria, does Rosa have copies of these documents? Yes, she made copies before the clinic sealed the files. She thought maybe someday the children would want to know the truth about their heritage. That evening, I called Marcus into the kitchen after the children were asleep. He could tell from my expression that something significant had happened. Dad, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sit down, son. I have something to tell you about the children. I showed him the documents Maria had brought, explaining Rosa's discovery at the fertility clinic. Marcus read through everything twice, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement to anger. She used my genetic material for all of them, even the triplets? It appears so. The DNA test we received during the trial only showed that the triplets weren't related to Victoria. No one thought to test whether they were related to you. Marcus put his head in his hands, processing this new information. So all 5 children are actually mine? Biologically mine? Yes. Victoria created this elaborate deception to keep you uncertain about your relationship with them. If you'd known all 5 were your biological children, you might have been more confident about making decisions without her input. The legal guardianship arrangements we made, we can change those now that we have this information. All 5 children can be legally yours without any complications. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents spread across our kitchen table. You know what the strangest part is, Dad? It doesn't change how I feel about them. I've loved all 5 of them equally since the day they were born. Finding out they're all biologically mine is wonderful, but it doesn't make me love them any more than I already did. That response told me everything I needed to know about the man my son had become. The Marcus who had been seduced by the Ashworth family's wealth and status would have been focused on the legal and financial implications of this discovery. This Marcus was focused on the children's emotional well-being. What we do now? He asked. We filed the necessary paperwork to establish your legal paternity for all 5 children. We update their birth certificates and medical records, and we make sure they know when they're old enough to understand that they're all full siblings of a father who loves them completely. And Victoria? Do we tell her what we discovered? I thought about this carefully. Victoria's deception had caused immeasurable pain to our family, but she was still the legal mother of 5 children who might someday want to understand their origins. We document everything for the children's future reference. But Victoria has forfeited the right to be involved in decisions about their lives. This information is for Marcus and the kids, not for her. The legal process of establishing Marcus's paternity for all 5 children took several months, but it was completed without complications. Charles, Samuel, and Marcus Jr. were officially recognized as Marcus's biological sons, making all 5 children full siblings in the eyes of the law. The children, now old enough to understand family relationships, were thrilled to learn they were all real brothers and sisters. Not that it had mattered to them before. They'd always treated each other as full siblings, but the official confirmation seemed to make them even more protective of each other. "We're all Washingtons," Maya announced proudly during dinner one evening. "All 5 of us together forever." "That's right, sweetheart," Marcus said, smiling at his daughter. "All 5 of you together forever." The house was officially too small for 7 people, but none of us wanted to leave. This was where Marcus had grown up, where Lorraine had lived and loved, where our family's real story had begun. Instead of moving, we renovated, adding bedrooms and bathrooms to accommodate our expanded family. Marcus had also made the decision to reduce his medical practice to part-time permanently. The foundation provided enough income to support our household, and he wanted to be present for his children's daily lives in a way that his demanding surgical schedule hadn't previously allowed. "I don't want to miss any more of their childhood," he said. "I already lost too much time trying to impress people who didn't matter." The children thrived in this environment. Maya and Sophie started kindergarten at the local public school, the same school system that Marcus had attended, the same schools where Lorraine had taught for 30 years. They were bright, confident children who made friends easily and excelled academically. The triplets, now preschoolers, were developing distinct personalities and interests. 3 years after Victoria's conviction, the Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation had become one of the most respected educational charities in the Washington, D.C. area. We awarded over 200 scholarships, established mentorship programs in 12 high schools, and created job placement services that had achieved a 90% success rate. Rosa Santos, now a successful nurse, had started a small fund to help other nursing students. One evening, as I was helping the children with homework around our kitchen table, Sophie looked up from her math assignment. "Grandpa Sam, is that why you started the foundation? To help kids like Grandma Lorraine did?" "That's exactly why we started the foundation, sweetheart. Grandma Lorraine wanted to make sure that smart, hard-working children could go to college even if their families didn't have much money." Marcus stopped helping Charles with his letters and looked at me with an expression I recognized, the same look he'd had as a child when he was processing something important. "Dad, do you think Mom will be proud of how everything turned out?" I looked around the kitchen at the scene of domestic happiness. 5 healthy, intelligent children working on their homework. A son who had found his way back to his values and was raising his children with love and integrity. A house filled with laughter and learning, and the kind of genuine warmth that no amount of money could purchase. "Son, I think she will be incredibly proud. Not because of the money or the foundation or any of the external things. She'd be proud because you're raising these children to be kind, honest, hard-working people who care about others. And after everything that happened, even after I let the Ashworths make me forget who I was, especially after that, the fact that you found your way back to your values, that you chose your children's well-being over social status, that you're teaching them what really matters, that would make her prouder than anything." Little Marcus Jr. held up his family portrait, a colorful drawing that showed all 7 of us, including whiskers on me, standing in front of our house with enormous smiles. "Look, Grandpa Sam, this is our family." And it was not the family Victoria had tried to create through lies and manipulation, not the family the Ashworths had tried to shape through social pressure and financial incentives. Just our family, imperfect but genuine, built on love rather than appearances. 10 years have passed since that wedding reception where I revealed my secret inheritance. As I write this, Maya and Sophie are 17 years old, preparing for college. The triplets are 16, each pursuing their own interests and talents. All 5 children are honor students, volunteer in their community, and treat each other with the kind of sibling loyalty that warms an old man's heart. Marcus is now 45, a respected pediatric surgeon who has found a perfect balance between his professional calling and his role as a father. He never remarried, choosing instead to focus his energy on raising his children and supporting the Foundation's mission. The Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation has awarded over 1,000 scholarships and has become a model for other educational philanthropies. We've helped create doctors, teachers, engineers, social workers, artists, and entrepreneurs who've launched successful careers. More importantly, we've helped create a generation of professionals who understand the importance of giving back to their communities. Victoria remains in federal prison, serving her sentence for conspiracy and attempted murder. She has never shown remorse for her actions or expressed any interest in her children's well-being. The children occasionally ask about her, but they seem content with a family they have rather than longing for the mother who deceived them. Charles and Patricia Ashworth were released from prison last year due to health complications, but they've made no attempt to contact our family. Their reputation in Washington society was completely destroyed by the scandal, and they reportedly moved to a small town in Florida where no one knows their history. The most important lesson I learned from all this is that money truly does reveal character rather than create it. The $95 million Lorraine left me didn't change who I was. It simply gave me the resources to test whether the people around me would treat me with respect regardless of my wealth. Some people failed that test spectacularly, but others, like Maria Santos and her daughter Rosa, like my friend Jerome, like the scholarship recipients who've gone on to help others, show that good character exists independently of financial status. Marcus learned the hardest lesson of all, that authentic relationships are built on mutual respect and shared values rather than social status or financial advantages. The Ashworth family's acceptance was conditional on their perception of his worth, while his real family's love was unconditional and enduring. Today, as I watch my 5 grandchildren playing in the same backyard where I once pushed Marcus on the swing set Lorraine and I built together, I know that we succeeded in creating something more valuable than any inheritance. We created a family legacy based on love, integrity, and service to others. We proved that real wealth has nothing to do with bank account balances and everything to do with the relationships we build and the positive impact we have on the world around us. Lorraine would indeed be proud. Not because we have money, but because we've used it wisely. Not because we've achieved social status, but because we've maintained our values. Not because we've impressed important people, but because we've raised children who know the difference between having worth and having wealth. And in the end, that's the most important inheritance any family can pass down to the next generation. The knowledge that your value as a human being has nothing to do with what you own and everything to do with who you choose to be. The money was just a test. Love was always the real treasure. How can I thank you enough for staying with me from part 1 of my story until the very end? I'm truly grateful that you listened patiently to my story. Thank you.